The desert was already awake before the soldiers. By 8:30 that morning, Fort Meridian shimmered under a cruel July sun. Heat waves rose from the asphalt like spirits escaping from the earth. The transport bus screeched to a halt at the gate, brakes squealing like something wounded, and the heavy doors hissed open. 17 recruits spilled out onto the cracked pavement, their boots crunching on dust and gravel. They were all in their early 20s, faces flushed with anticipation, shoulders tight with fear. Each clutched their duffel bag, as though it were the only anchor they had left in this unfamiliar place. And then there was her. She stepped down last. A woman who looked like she belonged anywhere but here. Sophia Vallon, 42 years old. Silver threaded through her black hair. Skin marked with gentle lines that suggested laughter, love, and time, not war. Her hands weren't the calloused fists of a soldier. They were weathered, yes, but practical. The kind that looked more suited to tending gardens than firing rifles. The other recruits noticed her immediately. How could they not? She stood out like a grandmother wandering into a nightclub. Some smirked. A few whispered. One muttered under his breath, "Wrong bus." But Sophia didn't flinch. She stood quietly, her eyes scanning the base with the same calm she might use to assess a grocery list. At least, that's how it looked. But if you watched carefully, you'd see it. The subtle way her gaze lingered on exits, cataloged sightlines, counted personnel. Her head turned just enough to register every movement, every detail. Not gawking, not curious, calculating. No one noticed, except Commander Emma Blackwell. Inside Fort Meridian's concrete administrative bunker, where fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects, and the air conditioning barely touched the desert heat, Commander Blackwell stared at Sophia's file. It was thin, too thin. 15 years of service had trained Emma to expect files that told entire stories, training scores, assignments, commendations, medical records thick enough to build a house with. But this was one page. One. It said Sophia had completed basic training back in 1999 at Fort Benning. And then nothing. No deployments. No awards. No disciplinary notes. No injuries. No record of existence. It was as if she'd simply vanished into administrative limbo for 24 years. The only strange detail came buried in the medical section. Subject cleared for specialized physical assessment. Authorization level 7 required. Level 7? Emma had never even heard of such clearance. Her discomfort deepened when she reached the bottom of the file. Emergency contacts. Blank. Not just empty, redacted. Heavy black lines where names should have been. She leaned back in her chair, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. People without contacts weren't forgotten. They were erased. She couldn't explain why, but just looking at the file made her skin crawl. "Ma'am." The voice pulled her from her thoughts. Lieutenant Morrison, her aide, was standing at attention, reading through the morning reports in his usual monotone. "The new specialist intake has arrived." Emma's eyes lingered on Sophia's file. "Process them through standard evaluation," she said automatically. Then she held the page up between two fingers. "But this one goes straight to Sergeant Reeves. I want a full assessment." Morrison frowned. "Any particular reason, ma'am?" Emma's reply was sharp. "Call it intuition." And Emma Blackwell's intuition had teeth. Sergeant John Reeves wasn't a man you called unless you wanted the truth carved into bone. Where Emma was precise, Reeves was raw energy, the kind of soldier forged in the fires of Iraq and Afghanistan, carrying scars he never spoke about, and a gaze that cut through recruits like barbed wire. His philosophy was brutal and simple. Pain is the best teacher, humiliation the best motivator. The training hall where he reigned was a cathedral of sweat and suffering. The air reeked of rubber mats, old blood, and the metallic tang of sweat. Every piece of equipment was designed to push human beings beyond their limits. This was where recruits learned what they were really made of, or broke trying, and Reeves loved the breaking. When the new recruits lined up for their first evaluation, Reeves prowled the room like a predator. His eyes scanned them, cataloging strengths and weaknesses as easily as a butcher weighing cuts of meat. Farm kids with strength but no discipline. City kids with brains but no survival instincts. Then his gaze landed on her. Sophia Valen. For a moment, his expression faltered, confusion, maybe even disbelief. Then he sneered. Well. His voice cracked across the hall like a whip. Looks like someone's mother got lost on the way to bingo night. The recruits laughed, some nervously, others cruelly. Sophia didn't react. She just stood there, hands at her side, posture steady, but unremarkable. A stone in the tide. Reeves' smirk deepened. He smelled weakness. And weakness, to him, was an invitation. But not everyone laughed. Private Amara Okafor, youngest of 7 children, quiet, observant, the kind of person who survived by noticing details others missed, was watching closely. And something about Sophia bothered her. It wasn't the way she looked out of place. It was the way she didn't. Sophia carried her gear like she'd done it 1,000 times before. She made her bunk with practiced precision. She flowed through the training hall like water moving downhill, never bumping into anything, never startled, never clumsy. And when she picked up her rifle later that day, pretending to fumble with the parts, Amara noticed the truth. Sophia's hands weren't clumsy. They were performing. She knew exactly where each piece went. She reassembled the weapon with invisible ease, hiding it under a mask of hesitation. Amara's stomach twisted. She didn't know why, but every instinct whispered the same thing. This woman isn't what she seems. By the time night fell, Reeves had already set his sights on Sophia as his personal project. Every insult sharpened. Every drill made harsher. He wanted to break her, send her home humiliated. But Sophia absorbed it all with silence. Her only responses, yes, Sergeant. Understood, Sergeant. Neutral. Calm. Like speaking to a wall. And that calm was starting to unnerve even the toughest recruits. They expected anger, tears, defiance, something human. Instead, Sophia gave them nothing. Nothing at all. It was like trying to fight smoke. But that was just the beginning. Because in 3 weeks, Sergeant Reeves would announce the most brutal test Fort Meridian had ever seen. And Sophia Valen, the woman everyone thought didn't belong, would step onto the mat against 5 of the best soldiers on the base. And in 37 seconds, nothing would ever be the same again. What would you have thought, standing there that first day, seeing a middle-aged woman in the lineup? Would you have laughed with the others, or noticed what Amara noticed? The desert does strange things to people. It strips you bare. Out here, weakness isn't a flaw, it's a death sentence. Sergeant John Reeves knew that better than anyone. And he decided that Sophia Valen was weakness incarnate. Every morning, he singled her out. Every run, every drill, every moment on the training field. She was his target. "Move it, Grandma," he barked one morning, his boots slamming against the gravel as he jogged beside her. "My dead grandmother moves faster than this." The recruits laughed, though their smiles cracked quickly under the weight of their own exhaustion. At first, Sophia looked like the slow one, her pace steady, almost mechanical. But as the miles dragged on, something odd happened. The 20-year-olds who'd started out like sprinters began to fade. Their strides faltered. Their breath came ragged. Some broke into awkward shuffles. Others slowed to a walk. But Sophia? 7 minutes, 30 seconds. Every mile, her breathing calm. Her posture unchanged. Step after step after step, like gears in a machine that couldn't tire. Private Amara Okafor glanced at her stopwatch, heart racing. It wasn't natural. Nobody could be that consistent. It was as if Sophia had locked herself into some hidden rhythm, one that ignored pain, ignored fatigue, ignored the desert itself. By mile 5, when half the recruits were ready to collapse, Sophia was still moving, unshaken, unbroken. Reeves didn't notice. He was too busy hurling insults. But Amara noticed. She always noticed. The shooting range was where the cracks in the mask grew wider. Targets stood 50 yards out, shimmering in the desert heat. Around Sophia, recruits fumbled with their stances. Some gripped their rifles too tight, jerking the barrel upward with every shot. Others fired too fast, missing by yards. The air filled with misfires, curses, and laughter. Reeves positioned himself right behind Sophia, sneering. "Steady those hands, Grandma. This ain't knitting circle." Sophia lifted her rifle slowly, carefully, the way a beginner would. She adjusted her stance like she was replaying the instructions step by step in her mind. To the casual eye, it looked clumsy, forced. But through her scope, her breathing steadied. The world narrowed to silence. Even the desert wind seemed to pause. Bang, bang, bang. 5 times. Methodical, unhurried. When the range master retrieved her target, the room fell silent. One hole. Not 5 scattered marks. Not a lucky grouping. One clean, ragged opening dead center in the bullseye, as if the paper had been drilled through. The range master, Sullivan, paled. In 20 years, he'd only seen shooting like that from classified instructors, whose names never appeared in public records. Reeves scoffed. "Lucky shot. Do it again." But his voice carried less conviction than before. Amara watched Sophia lower the rifle, her face unreadable. The weapon fit in her hands too naturally, too comfortably, like an extension of her body. This wasn't luck. This was control. If the rifle unnerved the recruits, hand-to-hand combat unsettled them even more. Reeves' style was brutal, overwhelming force, raw aggression. He threw recruits around the mat with ease, showing them what it meant to dominate. When it was Sophia's turn, Reeves paired her with Davidson, the broad-shouldered ex-wrestler who outweighed her by 60 pounds. The task, a simple hip throw. Davidson smirked, confident. Sophia looked hesitant, nervous even, as if she barely remembered the steps. She reached for him with what seemed like clumsy technique. Then, in one fluid motion, Davidson was on the mat, staring at the ceiling. Reeves barked corrections. "No, no, no. More force. You've got to drive through him." Again. Sophia nodded politely. "Yes, Sergeant." But Amara had seen it. The subtle shift of Sophia's weight, the exact placement of her hand, the way she leveraged Davidson's size against him. It wasn't the brute force maneuver Reeves had taught. It was something far more precise, elegant, efficient, like a master musician pretending to plunk out chopsticks while hiding the symphony in her fingers. And Amara's skin prickled with unease. Day after day, Reeves tried to break her. Humiliation, pressure, insults sharpened into blades. But Sophia never cracked. Her face remained calm, her voice neutral. She absorbed every strike, every word, with the stillness of stone. "Yes, Sergeant." "Understood, Sergeant." Nothing more. The recruits hated it. They needed an emotional cue, anger, defiance, even tears. Something human. Sophia gave them nothing. She was smoke. Every time Reeves tried to grab hold, she slipped through his fingers. And that silence, that calm, was beginning to gnaw at everyone around her. The breaking point came in week 3. The recruits filed into the briefing room, their bodies aching, their minds worn thin. Reeves stood at the front, eyes gleaming, voice heavy with finality. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we separate the soldiers from the pretenders. The Reaper drill." The words dropped like stones into a pond. Gasps. Nervous glances. The Reaper drill was legend at Fort Meridian. A combat exercise designed to crush recruits. One defender. Multiple attackers. Close quarters. No weapons. Standard odds. 3 against 1. Even that was nearly impossible. Most never lasted longer than 15 seconds. Reeves' grin widened. "But tomorrow, we're doing things different." His eyes locked on Sophia. Predatory. Hungry. Valen. His voice cut through the room like a knife. "You've been stumbling through the basics since day 1. Time to see if all that life experience is worth a damn." Sophia lifted her gaze. Calm. Steady. Reeves let the silence stretch. Then, like a judge passing sentence, 5 attackers. Our best. Against you. The room froze. Even the boldest recruits looked sick. 5-on-1 wasn't training. It was execution. "If you last 30 seconds without being pinned," Reeves continued, "I'll call it a victory. Hell, if you make it 10, I'll be impressed." A silence, so heavy it pressed against the walls. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. And then, Sophia smiled. Not wide, not mocking, just a small, almost tender smile, like someone hearing a beloved song after years of silence. Amara's stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed at her. This wasn't madness. This wasn't suicide. This was awakening. And in that instant, Amara knew they had all made a terrible, terrible mistake. If you were standing in that room, would you have pitted Sophia for being set up to fail, or feared what might happen next? Do you want to keep the same cinematic pace for Chapter 3, the morning of the Reaper drill and the shocking scars reveal? Or would you like me to slow down the detail even further, really stretching out the tension before the fight begins? Dawn broke over Fort Meridian like a blade. The desert sky bled into pale gold, shadows stretching long and sharp across the training grounds. The air was heavy with anticipation. Whispers passing like contraband between soldiers who had no business being awake this early, but found excuses anyway. By 7 a.m., the gymnasium was packed. Officers leaned against the walls. Recruits crowded the benches. The scent of sweat, rubber mats, and brewing adrenaline hung thick in the air. Everyone wanted to see it. The execution. The humiliation of Sophia Vallon. They called it training, but everyone knew this was theater. Sergeant Reeves had handpicked his predators. 5 of the base's finest young officers. Each one dangerous alone. Together, unstoppable. Davidson, the wrestler built like a bull, whose sheer size crushed lesser men. Torres, a martial arts prodigy, all speed and precision, who moved like a knife slicing air. McKenna, lightning reflexes faster than thought, his reputation already legend among peers. Bradford broad brutal, with fists like cinder blocks and no hesitation. Novak, the tactician, a mind sharp enough to read opponents, as if they were children's books. They stretched and warmed up at the far end of the mat, laughing quietly, their confidence radiating like heat waves. Predators before the hunt. This wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be a demonstration. On the observation deck, Commander Emma Blackwell leaned against the cold steel railing. She had spent the night with Sophia's files spread across her desk, unable to sleep. That single page gnawed at her mind like a splinter she couldn't pull free. Level 7 clearance. Redacted contacts. And that strange, gnawing silence in the record. Now, watching Sophia prepare below, Emma couldn't shake the unease flooding her veins. Something about this woman didn't fit. Something about this entire morning felt like standing in the eye of a storm that hadn't yet revealed itself. At exactly 8:30, the doors opened. Sophia Vallon stepped out. Gone was the hesitant woman, the one who seemed out of place, too polite, too soft. She crossed the gym floor with a fluidity that bent the air around her. Each step measured, deliberate. Amara Okafor, sitting in the front row, felt her throat tighten. She noticed something the others didn't. Sophia's hands. As she rolled up her sleeves, for the first time the room saw what had been hidden. Scars. Not random scrapes. Not accidents. But marks of violence, etched into her skin like stories written in blood. Long, precise lines. Circular scars, clean as bullet wounds. Jagged edges that spoke of shrapnel, glass, fire. They weren't the scars of survival. They were the scars of someone who had lived inside war. Gasps rippled through the recruits. A few turned pale. Even Reeves, for just a fraction of a second, blinked. On the observation deck, Emma Blackwell's heart nearly stopped. She had seen scars like that once before, in a briefing that didn't exist, about a unit that officially never lived. Soldiers whispered about them as Shadow 7, ghost operatives, war machines wearing human faces. And Sophia had the mark, just barely visible on her wrist, a tattoo. 7 parallel lines, one crossed out. Faded but clear. The mark of the 7th member. The one they said was dead. Sophia reached the center of the mat. She didn't stretch. She didn't posture. She simply stood, arms loose, breathing slow. Completely at ease. As if she were standing at home. The crowd fell into silence. Even the buzzing lights above seemed to dim, as though the room itself held its breath. Reeves stepped forward, his whistle dangling from his neck, his grin forced wider than usual. He barked the rules. No weapons. No strikes to the eyes or throat. Match ends when one side is incapacitated or surrenders. Then his gaze locked onto Sophia, mocking, sharp. Any last words before we end this little charade? Sophia raised her head. Her voice carried across the hall. Not louder than anyone else's, but heavier, denser. It carved itself into the air. Yes. Just one. She paused. Sergeant, when this is over, will you finally stop pretending you know what you're looking at? The words hung there, unshakable. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Even some of the officers shifted uneasily. Reeves' jaw tightened. He lifted the whistle. Across the mat, Davidson lowered his shoulder, ready to charge. Torres and McKenna slid to the flanks, predators circling. Bradford crouched low, a freight train in waiting. Novak, calm and calculating, hung back, his mind already moving 5 steps ahead. 5 wolves against 1 lamb. Except maybe the lamb was something else entirely. The whistle rose to Reeves' lips. The recruits leaned forward. Emma gripped the railing until her knuckles whitened. Amara's heart pounded, so loud she thought everyone could hear it. And Sophia Vallon smiled. A small, quiet smile. The kind you give when an old song finally begins. The whistle blew. In that silent moment before impact, what would you expect? A slaughter or a storm? The whistle cut the air like glass shattering. And the wolves moved. Davidson thundered forward, 220 pounds of muscle barreling straight for Sophia. His shoulder dropped, legs pumping like pistons. At that distance, his charge was unstoppable. Except it wasn't. Sophia didn't retreat. She didn't brace. She shifted. 6 inches. That was all. Just a step? No, less than a step. A slip of movement, so subtle you almost missed it. And Davidson plowed into empty space. Sophia's hand brushed his neck as he passed. A whisper of contact. The bull stumbled. His legs betrayed him. His body collapsed as if a cord had been cut. Davidson hit the mat, eyes wide, limbs tangled. He tried to stand, but his muscles refused him. Confusion twisted his face into something childlike. 3 seconds gone. Torres and McKenna swept in from the sides, a pincer strike designed to trap her. Their speed was blinding, their timing rehearsed. But Sophia wasn't there anymore. She flowed backward, not retreating, but redirecting. The 2 predators lunged where she had been, colliding with each other in a tangle of limbs and curses. McKenna tried to twist midair, but momentum is merciless. Their bodies slammed together, the sound echoing like a car crash. Sophia slipped between them, her hands moving faster than thought. A strike to McKenna's shoulder. His arm went limp, useless at his side. A sharp kick to Torres's knee, precise, surgical. He crumpled with a shout, clutching the joint. 9 seconds. Bradford charged low, aiming for her legs. He was a wall of force, determined to sweep her balance and pin her hard. But when he dove, Sophia wasn't on the ground anymore. She rose, effortless. Her body lifted just enough, like water pulled upward by invisible hands. Her elbow dropped with perfect geometry onto the base of Bradford's skull. He folded instantly, crashing down like a building losing its foundation. 12 seconds. The gym was silent now. For soldiers lay scattered across the mat, groaning, broken, defeated. Only Novak remained. He stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes locked on Sophia with something new in them. Not calculation, not confidence, fear. He had seen battles before. He'd studied tactics, read opponents, predicted every possible move. But this wasn't fighting. This was poetry written in violence. And he couldn't read the language. Sophia turned toward him, calm, breathing steady, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't attack. She waited. And Novak broke. He stepped back. One more. Then another. His hands lifted in surrender. I yield. His voice cracked in the silence. Barely a whisper. 17 seconds. Sophia moved across the mat. Not a victor strutting. Not a predator celebrating. She knelt. One by one, she checked them. Davidson, Torres, McKenna, Bradford. Her hands were gentle now, precise in another way, pressing nerves, soothing damage, ensuring her strikes had left no permanent wounds. The recruits watched in stunned silence. Even Reeves couldn't speak. Only Amara moved. Her palms began to clap. Once. Twice. Slow. The sound echoed across the gym like thunder. Others joined. Then more. Until the room was alive with applause. Not for a fight won. For a truth revealed. On the deck, Commander Blackwell couldn't breathe. Her eyes were locked on Sophia's wrist. That faded tattoo. 7 lines. One crossed out. Shadow 7. The unit that didn't exist. The soldiers who weren't supposed to be alive. And Sophia Valen, the 7th ghost. Presumed dead. Standing here. Alive. Sergeant Reeves knelt on the mat, staring at his champions lying defeated. For weeks, he'd mocked her. Tried to break her. Tried to teach her. But the truth hit him harder than any blow ever had. He had been lecturing a master, correcting perfection. The arrogance of his world crumbled. His pride lay shattered on the mat alongside his soldiers. Sophia collected her towel, her water bottle. She slung them over her shoulder casually, as if this had all been nothing more than a morning jog. She walked toward the exit, unhurried, steady. At the doors, Blackwell intercepted her, words trembling on her lips. "Your file," she began. But she stopped. "How do you question a ghost? How do you apologize to a legend?" Sophia met her gaze. Calm, deep, endless. "It did what it was supposed to," she said softly. "Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight." Then she stepped through the doors, and they closed behind her. 37 seconds had passed, and nothing at Fort Meridian, nothing in their lives, would ever be the same again. If you had seen those 37 seconds with your own eyes, would you feel safer knowing Sophia existed, or terrified knowing she was out there? 3 months later, Fort Meridian felt different. Not on the surface. The sun still baked the asphalt into molten black each afternoon. The training halls still smelled of sweat and rubber. Recruits still broke down under Reeves' drills. Their bodies and egos snapped like dry twigs. But underneath, everything had changed. It was as if those 37 seconds had rewired the DNA of the base. Sophia Valen was no longer just another recruit. Within hours of the Reaper drill, she had been quietly reassigned. No announcement, no ceremony, just a line of text in the daily orders. Specialist Valen, Advanced Combat Instructor. Her past remained classified, sealed behind levels of clearance that even Commander Blackwell couldn't touch. But her future had begun in plain sight. She stepped into the role like she had been waiting for it her whole life. Her classes didn't look like anyone else's. She didn't bark. She didn't humiliate. She didn't measure strength by how much weight you could lift or how fast you could run. Instead, she taught control. She taught silence, stillness, awareness. She taught her students that power was a muscle. It was timing, precision, understanding human movement so deeply that you could predict the punch before it was thrown. Some recruits hated it. They wanted sweat, blood, bruises. But the ones who stayed, the ones who listened, walked away changed. No one changed more than Private Amara Okafor. She had been watching Sophia from the beginning, seeing truths others missed. Now, under Sophia's instruction, those instincts sharpened into weapons. Amara learned that unpredictability was her greatest strength. That flowing like water, ungraspable, untouchable, was deadlier than brute force. Sophia never raised her voice in training, never once mocked or berated. Instead, she asked questions. Questions that made Amara rethink everything she believed about combat, about herself. By the end of her first month, Amara realized something terrifying. She didn't want to be like Sophia. She wanted to become the kind of person Sophia was teaching her to see. Someone who understood that real strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, hidden, waiting. And then there was Sergeant Reeves. The man who had spent 3 weeks trying to break Sophia had been broken himself. At first, he raged. He couldn't reconcile what he had seen. A woman he'd mocked as Grandma, dismantling his best soldiers in less than a minute. It shook him, shattered him. But slowly, something new grew in the ruins of his pride. Humility. Reeves began attending Sophia's sessions, not as an overseer, as a student. He stood at the back at first, arms crossed, pretending to evaluate. But over time, he asked questions. He listened. He practiced. And in private, he defended her. To other instructors. To skeptical superiors. He, of all people, became her loudest advocate. Some said Reeves was a different man after that day. Others whispered he had finally become the man he was always meant to be. The 5 who had faced her on the mat carried the memory like a scar. Davidson, the wrestler, tempered his arrogance into thoughtfulness. Torres abandoned flash and relied on subtler techniques, chasing the efficiency he'd seen in her. McKenna, once the golden boy of reflex, studied patience for the first time in his life. Bradford, the brute, learned the weight of restraint. And Novak carried the greatest burden. Because Novak had been the one to surrender, the first to yield. And though shame haunted him, it also forged him. He became the most devoted student of Sophia's philosophy, studying the patterns of human behavior like scripture. They had all been broken that day. But what grew back was stronger. Commander Blackwell felt the change more keenly than anyone. The inquiries started first. Subtle calls from offices she'd never heard of. Departments that didn't exist on paper. They asked about Sophia, her performance, her methods, her influence. Blackwell never gave them more than what she had to. But deep down she knew. Sophia wasn't just another soldier. She was a bridge between the world they all lived in and the shadow world where impossible problems demanded impossible people. Late at night, when the base was quiet, Emma sometimes replayed Sophia's words at the door. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight, and she wondered how many other ghosts walked among them, wearing ordinary faces. Sophia never spoke about her past, but sometimes, when she stood at her office window, staring at the endless desert night, she touched the faded tattoo on her wrist. 7 lines. One crossed out. To the world, that cross meant death. To her, it meant something else. Transformation. Not an ending, but a beginning disguised as one. She had been buried, forgotten, a ghost. But now she had purpose again. And maybe that was all she had ever wanted. Stories spread. They always do. Most of the details of that July morning were classified, sealed in reports nobody would ever read. But soldiers talk, recruits whisper, and legends grow. They spoke of a woman who defied age, who broke physics, who dismantled 5 warriors in 37 seconds without breaking a sweat. They called her many things. The ghost, the shadow, the storm. But those who had stood in the gym that morning knew the truth. Sophia Vallon wasn't just a fighter. She was a reminder that the most dangerous person in any room is always the one you least expect. Do you believe legends like Sophia walk quietly among us, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment the world needs them? Or are they only stories we tell ourselves to believe in something greater?